He dies in a gray suit with white metal buttons, wearing a wig that's already slipping. In his hands, Lucian's Dialogues of the Dead, mockery of Charon ferrying souls across the Styx, and of the souls who don't want to go. Boswell stands outside the door, certain the atheist will finally crack, show his fear, reveal himself a fraud. Instead, the man laughs, says the morality of every religion is rotten, and that hearing of a pious man means hearing of a scoundrel. He dies so peacefully that those present wrote to friends, "Nothing could surpass the happiness of that calm." David Hume. He was born in Edinburgh, but childhood was Ninewells, a stone house on the Scottish border. Neighboring farms, foresters, the River Whiteadder. His father, a minor landowner and lawyer, died when David was 2. His mother, young, beautiful, a strict Calvinist, never remarried. She managed the estate, kept everything in order, and expected the same from her boy. She wanted him to be a lawyer. She complained to friends that he was impossibly stubborn. But he was reading Cicero, Virgil, Locke. At 12, he entered Edinburgh University with his brother. At 16, he walked out. His brother John went into law. David stayed with his mother and sister Catherine, who never married either. The three of them lived in a house that felt too large. He dug through his father's library by candlelight at night and ran along the riverbank with the neighborhood boys by day. At 18, his mind broke. A deep bout of melancholy, psychosomatic collapse, the suspicion that reason itself was failing. He would write later, "I felt I had been attacked by forces against which all my strength was powerless." His heart pounded, his hands trembled, his thoughts knotted into something with no exit. Doctors bled patients for this sort of thing. What helped was time, silence, and walks along the river. He memorized Chaucer to test whether his memory still worked. It did, but joy was gone. Out of that dark room came the question that would consume him. How do we know anything at all? Impressions are vivid and strong. Pain, hunger, joy. Ideas are just their faded copies. Everything in the mind comes from experience, no innate ideas. Even the idea of God is assembled from pieces of things we've seen and felt. He wasn't working in abstractions. He was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling, testing this on himself. The mind is not a lamp that generates its own light. It's a mirror, reflecting only what has passed through the body. And if the body is in pain, the picture warps. He broke his own mind, trying to understand how it works. He never quite explained that paradox in his books. Maybe because any explanation is also just a bundle of words. He spent years in isolation, reading and writing. He built a system meant to do for the science of human nature what Newton had done for the physical world. The book came out anonymously. It died on arrival. "Dead born from the press," he'd say later. No one read it. No one reviewed it. One bookseller complained he'd sold fewer than 10 copies in 3 months. In that book, he had written about the passions, direct ones like hunger, pain, and joy, indirect ones like pride, envy, and compassion. He argued that we don't become who we are through free will. We become who we are through habit and the people around us. Our virtues and vices aren't metal springs inside us. They're the marks left by everything that happened to us and everyone we've been near. Imagine a 25-year-old today posting a theory that breaks all of physics and finding only silence in the comments. Sitting by a window in some small town, not knowing, am I an idiot? Or has the world just not caught up? Then finding out 20 years later that he's famous as the author of a pretty good history textbook. At 23, needing money and rest, he took a job with a sugar merchant in Bristol. The sugar came from Barbados. He checked invoices, counted figures, and understood each day that he was spending time he could have spent thinking. He lasted a few months, then left for France. First Reims, then La Flèche, a small town beside the old Jesuit college where Descartes had once studied. He lived in a small room above a tavern, ate bread and cheese, and wrote at night when the town was asleep. The candle burned down, the ink froze on the table, and he kept rewriting because the thought wouldn't let him sleep. He came back, published new work, and was met again with silence. He applied for a chair at Edinburgh, rejected. Glasgow, the same. His skepticism about miracles and religion made the faculty nervous. One professor said plainly, "We cannot give a chair to a man who questions miracles." He was considered either an atheist or a corrupter of morals. The academy kept its doors shut. So he hired himself out as a tutor to the Marquess of Annandale, who had gone mad. A year of that. Then secretary to General St. Clair on a military expedition off the French coast. Then diplomatic missions to Vienna and Turin. Money finally appeared. He returned to Scotland and began 15 years of his most productive work. Essays, philosophical investigations, and above all, a 6-volume History of England. It was the history, not the philosophy, that made him wealthy and famous. People bought it not because they were searching for truth, but because he knew how to tell a story. He wrote about kings, wars, and conspiracies the way you talk over dinner. He didn't sanctify heroes or blacken villains. He showed how people acted out of passion, fear, and habit. Readers recognized themselves in his characters, their own weaknesses, their own small betrayals. At 40, he became librarian at the Advocates' Library in Edinburgh. Access to books? Priceless. He had money now, a reputation, a large house. He lived alone with a servant and a cat. He threw dinners where conversation ran past midnight and paid for everything himself. When he was past 50, Paris came calling, a post as secretary to the British Embassy. He resisted for a while, citing age and love of quiet, then gave in. What followed was almost absurd. High society lost its mind over him. Good David, they called him everywhere. He was received at court. Ladies at masked balls whispered compliments. He argued in the salons with Diderot, D'Alembert, d'Holbach. He wrote to a friend, "I feel as though I were raised here from birth." He bought new suits, ate in good houses, played whist until midnight, lost money, and laughed. He said he had never received so much flattery and that it frightened him more than criticism. He grew heavier, but didn't change inside. Still the same Scotsman who preferred plain talk to fine speeches. He returned to Edinburgh with trunks full of new clothes and a firm intention to never travel again. He was heavy-set, broad-faced, and, by the accounts of contemporaries, wore an expression of mild vacancy. One lord joked that Hume looked more like a provincial official who loved a solid dinner than an elegant philosopher. But he loved roast chicken, card games, and a good laugh. And he didn't pretend otherwise. His philosophy could be summed up in a line he actually believed. Be a philosopher, but among all your philosophy, remain a man. He genuinely thought life mattered more than books, and company more than proof. He could argue about the nature of the soul in the morning and lose at cards in the evening without feeling any contradiction. But here's where the familiar picture cracks. In his early essays, he attacked slavery with fury, called it barbarism, said it corrupts the master, diminishes humanity, and is economically self-defeating. He wrote that slavery turns society into a sick organism, one part rotting while the other doesn't notice the smell. Then, at the peak of his prosperity, he wrote to a patron about investing in a plantation on Grenada, worked by enslaved people. He lent a substantial sum to one of the investors. This wasn't theory anymore. These were real fields, real people. No freedom. You can try to explain it away. He was thinking of a friend's benefit. He didn't see the contradiction. But the fact stands. The man who called slaveholders tyrants helped that tyranny take root. Maybe he thought of the plantation as just land, the enslaved workers as just workers. Maybe he didn't think at all. It's like someone today writing passionately about climate and then quietly investing in coal, or speaking about rights while their hands are deep in someone else's pain. The only difference is that today we call this hypocrisy, and then it was called business. We still don't know whether to call it hypocrisy or the blindness of an age. He returned from France not alone. He brought Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was fleeing persecution. Hume genuinely wanted to help, found him lodgings in Derbyshire, sorted out the practical matters, but Rousseau's paranoia was deepening. He became convinced that Hume was leading an international conspiracy to humiliate him. Letters of accusation, shouting. Hume was heading a network of spies. Hume had poisoned his food. Hume laughed at first, then stopped. Afraid for his reputation, he published their private correspondence to clear his name. It looked bad. But he wasn't a saint, he was a man. He wrote to friends with bitter bewilderment. He had tried to do good and ended up in a nightmare. He never again tried to rescue a genius. He understood that kindness, like any other passion, requires caution. His last years were Edinburgh, friends, dinners, quiet. He spent them thinking about the self. If you look inward, you won't find any immortal soul or unchanging center. What's there is a churning stream, sensations, fleeting thoughts, scraps of memory. No captain at the helm. Only habit ties it all into the story we've learned to call ourselves. He demolished the concept of personal identity and remained the most coherent person of his time. A skeptic who didn't believe in the immortal soul, he remembered the names of all his friends, their deaths, and what they called their cats. Maybe habit, in his understanding, was just another form of love. We don't remember those we love because we have a soul. We love those we remember because we have a habit. Have you ever caught yourself telling a story about yourself that you've already stopped believing? A year before the end, the illness sharpened. Stomach, intestines, exhaustion. He lost weight fast. His face turned gray. The doctor came twice a week. Hume knew the waiting was all that was left. But he prepared a new edition of his works, saw friends, played cards. Adam Smith wrote that Hume's cheerfulness was so great that no one believed death was near. He accepted medicines that didn't help, ate what his stomach could manage, and read what kept him distracted. He reread his old essays sometimes and smiled, not from pride, but at how far the person who wrote them had traveled. Then Boswell came, still hoping to see the terror. Hume was calm, said the afterlife was as absurd as the idea that coal might not burn in fire. He read Lucian and laughed at Karen, who comes for a woodcutter and is asked to wait. The man just needs to finish stacking his wood, then he'll be happy to go. His philosophy had said the self is just a bundle of contingent connections. Now the bundle was coming undone. No panic, no crying out. Absolute, cheerful calm. Those present wrote to friends that until his last breath, he showed not a trace of impatience and spoke to those around him with enormous tenderness. He died in August at home. He was 65. Adam Smith wrote afterward that he had never seen anyone die with such dignity and ease. He was buried in Edinburgh on Calton Hill without a church service, as he had asked. The crowd followed in silence, not in grief, but with the kind of respect that doesn't need tears. We come back to that gray suit with its white buttons, the slipping wig, the man who laughed at death, not because he thought death wasn't the end, but because he'd stopped needing it to be anything other than what it was. Did you ever think that being human is philosophy enough? Be a philosopher, but a man.